battling with the rise of the right.
My name's Bryan. I am a Welsh Labour town councillor in a small town called Machynlleth, which is in mid and West Wales. But I'm also a communications director for a global climate change organisation. And I think from those 2 points of view, the very, very local and the very global, we're really, really seeing the massive impacts that the rise of the far right are having everywhere. This is not just happening in the UK, this is happening globally. There are far right governments in coalition, and there are far right governments, far right parties, if they're not already in government, are very, very nearly being there. The far right party Reform are targeting Wales. We've got Welsh Assembly elections in 2026, and at the moment they are polling second, Plaid Cymru are first, and Labour are hemorrhaging votes left, right and centre. So we've got a really difficult and tricky situation, and it's really, really important to remember that Reform are a far-right English nationalist party that are targeting Wales not because they care about Wales in any way, shape or form, but they're seeking to undermine Welsh democracy. They're seeking to undermine what we've got from the devolved government and a relatively progressive government that we've had since 1998. And they're trying to take power back and put it back into the hands of Westminster. So we are needing to get really organised in Wales. We're needing to combat this. Some of the things that what I call my four-pronged approach that I'd like to talk to you guys about is hyperlocality, like really listening and building our resistance on issues that affect people locally, about building visibility around all the things that we're doing. Like, we often do things in our echo chambers, but we're needing to step out of our echo chambers, be much more on the streets, be much more visible. Also want to talk about this kind of idea of dividing and conquer, that when we talk about reform, understand there's lots of different reasons people are being drawn to vote for reform, and they're not all suddenly...
One more minute.
Not everyone's ever suddenly become a fascist overnight. So understanding who the reform tribes are and what types of messaging work with those different audiences. And then lastly, stopping the bitching between other political parties. It's really off-putting. What we need to be doing at the moment is progressives need to be coming together to work out how to stop reform from getting a foothold in Wales and not kind of arguing about voting for this party or the other. So that's my pitch to you guys, to things to just talk about.
Many thanks, Kim. Yeah, little round of applause. I think that's very fitting. Tyrone, please.
Hi everyone. So my name is Tyrone Scott, and I work for War on Want, and I lead our movement building and activism work. And then, wait, don't know why I said and then. That's pretty much who I am. That's who I am. But then some folks may know me from time in the Green Party. I ran to be deputy leader and came second in that race 2 or 3 years ago. And I've ran for various council elections and MP elections as well. Which means, I guess, I've got the perspective of sort of the grassroots organising that's needed, and then that sort of strong, powerful movement that we need from a sort of activist-based level, but then also sort of the perspective of having to do the political work and the political organising to try and seek the change that we want. And just dropped my book, but one thing that I really resonated, which you just said then, Kim, was around sort of stop the bitching between parties. And I think that's going to be something that's so important over the next few years. And it's probably one of my biggest fears in regards to whether or not we're able to stop this reform government, or the potential reform government, from being elected in a few years' time. So as I've just said there, obviously I've spent my time as a Green Party member for my political life and most of my adult life. But at the moment, of course, what I want is the Greens to be successful, and I want the Greens to, do as great as they can in the next election, and continue our path towards having sort of more influence. But the most important thing for me now, and I hope for everybody over the next few years, is we cannot have a fascist government in this country, a far-right, racist, fascist, destructive, anti-essentially every single marginalised group government, which will have incredibly destructive consequences for all of our communities. And I worry that, as even as we see now with the new Corbyn and Sultana party and the Your party and all the sign-ups there, that even then I've heard a little sometimes disparaging remarks from some people in other parties of this, for me, it's yes, of course, I'd love those people to be with the Greens. Of course, that'd be great for me as a Green. But the most important thing is there's 500,000-600,000 people who are showing that they've got progressive views and want something different and care about securing justice and all of these things. That's what's important to me. Let's just nurture that in whatever sort of shape that it takes. And I think I do fear that as a left, as we like to do sometimes, is like tear each other down from the other side, that's going to be the thing that allows, or one of the things that could allow reform in. And just, I guess, the last thing to wrap up is, none of this stuff has just happened out of nowhere or in a particular vacuum. There's been warning signs for such a long time. But even maybe the biggest one, say, from 2016 onwards, even though there's some before, we had Brexit vote here, the first iteration of Trump in the US. We've seen this slight sort of change of the narrative and surge to the right generally. That was nearly a decade ago. Like 2016, I know it's scary because time's going fast, but 2016 was nearly 10 years ago. And, we can say there's been a lot of analysis there about, we weren't quite the organised left we needed to be to stop these certain things. Well, it's been 9 years later now. There's a couple more years potentially until the general election. And we're still maybe not quite that organised, unified left that we need. And, 9 years, so basically, I just worry that we need to really come together, really be an organised left, and absolutely not get tribalism about it.
Need to get moving. We need to get organised. Thank you. Thank you very much. Francis.
Hi, so I work at an organisation called Compass. We work across the progressive left and do a lot of what Tyrone has just said, so I very much support that point of view about cooperation. But I actually don't like the framing of Rise of the Right. I think it sounds like a superhero villain film that I would want to watch. It sounds exciting, it sounds adrenaline fueled, it's energising, and I think we should do a lot of work. Language can't solve all these problems, but we should be thoughtful about how we use language to amplify this idea of this threat. I also don't like the language about combating, tackling, countering. It's all quite violent. I think that is important that we kind of keep our mind to what we are trying to say to people, and also because it encourages this massive pushback, right? So, yeah, well, smash. If you want to go smash fascism, do it outside this tent. This is not the space for that, I would say. A lot of people, what people hear from that is an attack, right? So when you say stuff like smash, people feel that they are being attacked, and what they will do is attack back, right? So this is kind of animal brain. We understand how these things work. So I kind of got 3 points to make today. Firstly is that, for me, the biggest problem in politics is not actually the rise of the right, it's alienation and apathy and disaffection. And we can all engage with that. We can all understand where that comes from. We can all empathise with that. If that is your starting place and what you think is the biggest problem in politics, then what you do following from that is quite different from, to me, smashing, pushing, combating. The second is that I do worry that sometimes the rise of a populist party allows the parties of the mainstream not to do the work that they should really do. So I think sometimes that can be an excuse to say, well, look, we're not as bad as these guys. We'll just kind of hunker down, we'll do the same thing, we'll protect the status quo, and actually with this threat, we're going to get into defensive mode. And I think that is really understandable, but we're going to be brittle. So let's not get defensive, let's understand what we've missed and what we've got wrong. And finally, if anyone was at this session yesterday that Maria ran about radical curiosity, and I think radical is serving two purposes in this tent, right? So a lot of us feel like radicals, but also it's deep, it's difficult, it's extreme curiosity. It's bloody hard work, but I think that's where we should be spending most of our time and effort in really seeking to understand, connect with, and not push away a lot of people who feel alienated and isolated in the system right now. Start with the relationships first, and then you can get on to the things that people care about, which is a lot of the things that we all care about.
Fantastic. Relationships first. Really, really good. Thank you. John.
I'm going to start with a little bit of psephology. It's not actually that well researched as psephology. I used to study election results and do analyses of them for different parties. The bit of psephology that I'm going to give you is a bit pop, because I haven't ever had the money to really do the proper research. But there's very good evidence, in my opinion, that if you look at all the way back in 2010, do you remember Clegstasy? No. Okay, so there was this massive surge for the Lib Dems, right? They got nearly 3 million extra votes in 2010. And, everyone was getting very excited in the Liberal centre about this. And there's very good evidence that those voters, the same people who did that, 5 years later, in 2015, voted for UKIP. Which is kind of odd, right? I mean, and there's very good evidence that they then voted for Brexit, and then they voted for Corbyn in 2017, and then they voted for Johnson in 2019. So, I mean, what the fuck, basically? Except that, it's maybe picking up on what Francis said, this is an angry electorate looking for something different. And in 2010, they actually thought the Lib Dems might be it. And, for those of us with a more political frame, we kind of roll our eyes and go, really? But, yeah, they did. So there's a lot of people out there, and I get this on a very personal level. I'm open to, on social media, to all sorts of political opinions from people I know. And I get people who flip on Britain First stuff against halal slaughter, because they love animals, right? And I'm kind of like, seriously? You think Britain First give a shit about animals? But, they are also signing up. They're in the 600,000, right? So one of the really key messages I would say, for however we talk about combating fascism, combating the far right, whatever the language we use, in my opinion, a very large number of reform voters are radical people, right? They're looking for radical change. So are we. It's just that they haven't got a peg to hang it on that we agree with, right? Okay, but we can find one. But to demonise and make enemies of them is a big, big mistake, in my opinion. And just to finish off, one
very quickly, my friend.
It's just to say the people who really want that are the authoritarian liberal centre, because already we can see from that group that they're setting up that the choice for us now is going to be right-wing Labour or Reform. Okay, and that's a bullshit choice, and we have to reject it, in my opinion. So we have to, we have to win Reform voters over to us and get a radical left alternative.
Okay, big round of applause for everyone. Okay, so you good people have thoughts on this, I think. Hans, so it's fine to make a comment. You don't need to ask a question. We really want to know what you think. So I've got a gentleman at the back. We've got 2 people running mics. Thank you very much for your help. And if you don't want to be filmed, just say so.
Hi, thank you. I'm a county councillor in Kent, a Green one, and I've got 57 of these far-right people in my council chamber. I've got... The response from them is horrible. They are racist, misogynistic, transphobic, homophobic. It's just revolting trying to debate with them. So my question to you is, do I carry on challenging them as a councillor in terms of the chamber, in terms of the political debate? Do I focus on my constituency work, my ward work, to make sure I strengthen my position for the next round of elections, or do I do both? And that question is like for my colleagues who are also, are we fighting them directly, or are we just building support for the next round?
Yeah, this is an absolutely brilliant practical question. So I'm going to go to the panel a little bit, but I think other people in the audience might have thoughts on this. So please raise your hands if you want to comment on this particular point, and then we'll take more questions. Anyone on the panel want to come back to this gentleman's very real plight?
I really, really sympathise with you, and my heart goes out to you, and thank you very much for doing what you're doing. I think what's really important is Reform have a really, really strong recruitment strategy. So once you join, they'll put you through a training programme where you will be asked to go and stand for school governorship, town council, parish council, county council. So they've got a really strong recruitment programme. We are not doing that. Like, you may not want to be a political representative. I totally get that. That's fine. I'm a councillor, and it's not great. But I think there's a campaign called Stand for Something, and I really do think we need to be very, very seriously considering, as well as pushing on the outside, is getting more people into elected positions, because like this gentleman here, being left on your own there is really difficult, and Reform will be getting more positions. That's what they're trying to do. They're not trying to get power to help people. They're trying to consolidate their power. And what I also, just to add, I think it's exhausting fighting them. It's absolutely draining. My tactic is just to focus on the good things that I'm doing and be very visible. Like, I got our public toilets reopened. I'm always banging on about that. And I think it's really important to just not fall into the politics of division and toxicity that they bring with them, but just try and focus on building your power base and the good work that I'm sure you're doing.
So it still really matters that we get people elected at local level, but also that we support the people who are elected. So, there's work for all of us to do there. Is there anyone else on the panel? Francis?
Yeah, just really briefly, I would totally echo that. I think one way to go into this is to think about if you're getting dragged into this contest, that can be a massive turn-off for people. A lot of people will just look away. I think 2 things. One, being radically propositional. So what are you offering that is actually going to bring like a different gravitational force for people, right? What's pulling them in? I'm sure there's a lot of things. And focus on that, because that's what you should be spending your energy on telling people about. And then the second thing is, I take some cue from Zoran Mandani in New York on this, in that I had this beautiful line recently, which is a lot of politicians
Not everyone knows who that is.
Sorry.
Can you just slow down and just
He just won the Democratic primary election to be mayor of New York, which was quite a surprise victory. Some people saw him as a sort of bit of a populist, but actually I think he's a very pluralist left candidate, and I really love the way he communicated. And someone commentating on this said, a lot of politicians communicate through, most politicians communicate policy. They just go out there and tell you their policy. The best politicians communicate through policy. So like show, don't tell. If you think about Trump's The Wall or you think about AOC's Green New Deal, they are kind of showing who they are through like key policies. And it reinforces the first point. So if you're propositional and you're radically focused on the things that you are actually bringing, it makes you seem confident. It allows you not to get dragged into this sort of catfight between politicians. And it allows people to hear what you're actually about, which offers them an alternative to reform.
Thank you. So, it doesn't look like anyone else on the panel is wanting to talk. Is there anyone else who wants to come back on that point? What is it, this particular point, or do you have another question?
I'm a town council in Glastonbury, where we have the benefit of having a majority on that council. My hometown is Boston, Lincolnshire, so you can imagine what I'm about to say. Those two places are poles apart. Well, on my visits to see my elderly mother in Boston, I come across a lot of Reform voters, particularly at the football matches that I attend. And I agree with the chap here. I do sympathise with the lone Green county councillor, and I would suggest that you take the advice of the lady there and concentrate on your own stuff and seek common ground where appropriate, but don't get drawn in. But what I'd like to say is that I would say, in my experience, 50% of Reform voters that I've come across are very persuadable to vote Green in Boston, because they're looking for radical change, and you just need to engage, find common ground, and there's votes for the Greens there. So I'd like to agree with the gentleman on the left.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Thank you. So this isn't just about what happens in the council chamber or in Parliament. This is also about the conversations that we have in the pub or in a cafe. So, you know, if you've had interesting conversations where you feel like you've been able to establish common ground with people, that's also really interesting for this conversation. Okay, any other questions? Yes, please.
Less of a question, just more of a comment. I want to pick up on what Francis said about language, and I think language is actually what has convinced people to vote for reform. Like, language is enormously important, and I completely agree that we need to take away this kind of combative language, because you can't like counter hate. I'm using the word counter, but you can't address hate with hate, and I think people on the left are rightly horrified that the far right is rising all over the world. But in order to counteract that, we need to have better discourse, and we need to kind of like challenge that hateful language, because if we're using hateful language on the left as well, we're just going to breed more hate. That was just my comment.
Thank you. That's really great. Thank you. That's exactly what we're looking for. Okay, I just want to, before we come to your question, was it in response to that young lady? Yeah, go for it. That's great. Thank you.
I think for the large part I do agree with that, but I think that there is a careful distinction between hate and anger. I think people are angry, and I think we can't shy away from expressing our own anger at things, because I think that that's also what people are looking for, of people who can recognise the anger that everyone is feeling right now about how left behind everyone feels. So I think, yes, there's not being hateful, but I think we do have to embrace our own anger at.
And can I open that up a little bit? So it's a really, really important point. And when you say that, are you saying that if we didn't express our anger, that we would somehow be betraying our values? Help me understand, because it's a really important point you're making.
I think that in kind of not expressing like true like anger and our feelings about things, that we can kind of appear to, I don't quite know how to phrase it.
It doesn't feel authentic,
yeah.
Perhaps? Right, okay. So we're getting to it. That's really interesting. Thank you for that. Is there anyone on the panel who wants to come back on that point? This is a really important point.
Just on anger, really quickly. So, you know, I'm angry. I'm really angry about the way politics have gone in this country. You know, the Labour Party's been completely stolen from us. The system's gamed against us. In 2017, you know, the establishment rate was something like, out the sleeve come the unionists, you know. Oh, yeah, we've forgotten about them. They keep them in Northern Ireland. It's a little trick. It's, you know, we get ripped off. We get robbed. We're not in a democracy. It's a fake democracy. Now we get authoritarian centrism telling us that it's terrorist to support Palestine action, you know. Yeah, so I really want to agree with you about that, and I think it's a really important access point to a lot of people who've gone to the far right, because anger is typically underwriting a lot of what the right wing do, right? So if we know ours and we own it, we can talk to those people.
I want to come to Tyrone, but I also want you to repeat a point that you said when we last did this, and I think you know what that is. Okay, Tyrone, please.
Yeah. Yeah, something I've given a lot of thought, actually, and I think it's still something that's quite difficult to navigate. I know we did this panel before, we weren't completely on the same page with it either, and it's difficult because I don't want to be in the politics of negativity or sort of build my campaign on negativity, and I think it's very, very important that when we're sort of trying to change the world, as it were, for not being too corny around it, we're not just talking about how bad things are, it's about the positive vision of the future that we're trying to achieve, and I think that should always be the underlying part of our work. At the same time, there is a lot of anger there, I think, that is absolutely valid. And I think right now that's what's being capitalized on by, I guess, the architects behind the right. I think there's absolutely valid reasons why people feel so disenfranchised and, everyone's struggling so much and they needed that sort of someone to blame, essentially, or they've been told they need someone to blame. And I think that's what's seen with sort of, even especially at the moment with the attacks on the asylum seeker hotels and everything, and that like the other is being blamed so much for taking people to the brink of, everyone's struggling so hard, and they need that sort of well, they've been told they need an enemy. And I spoke last time around that there's been a villain basically presented to people. And I don't think necessarily it's the right approach that there should be a villain. But if there is going to be a villain and people are appointed to a villain, I think that should be reframed in the right direction, which is, I guess, a lot of the narrative work that we've been trying to do around, like, it is not migrants, refugees, your neighbours on benefits who are making it hard for you to pay your rent, never mind the other issues that you have. It's the billionaires, the super rich, corporations, the systems, and it's hard not to be angry at them too. And I think it's just find that right balance of sometimes when we say we're angry at fascism and the rise of fascism, I'm not angry at the vast majority of those voters. There's people who have just needed someone to direct their anger. So when sometimes I talk about like fuck fascism, I don't think most of the voters or people of Poland saying they're going to vote for reform, that's not who I'm talking about, So it is the right balance, but I'm always going to be angry at the architects behind it who have driven us to this point. But that does not mean I'm angry at the people who have been convinced that, all of this, everyone's struggling to get to the end of the month and never mind everything else. So it's how do we reframe that, have that positive vision, but also, for me anyway, show people that actually there is a result of somebody's actions. It's just not who you think it is.
So anger at the issue and not the person, is that part of what you're saying?
Yeah, and the system. But at the end of the day, like, there is architects behind that system, and like,
yeah,
I don't know, I'm angry at them.
Yeah, 100%. Did you want to come in on the point?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something I think a lot about with this, and it's really interesting that anger's come up again. As Tyrone said, we talked about this a lot at the last panel, and something that goes through my head in this is anger in relationships can be really productive, healthy, honest emotion. Like as John was saying, to be avoided at all costs is contempt. Contempt is the most corrosive of all emotions, and this is kind of grounded in a lot of experimentation and theory. If you can stay in anger with people, that can be really empathetic, and it can show that you're putting a vulnerability on the table. But if you show any kind of contempt for people's views, that is just shuts down. And I think sometimes it can be difficult to find the dividing line, the two, and people are very hypersensitive to contempt. We all are, right? If somebody feels like they're contempting, like for showing contempt for what you're saying, they're going to step out of the conversation. Just one more point to make on that. I think sometimes when I say the things that I do, it come across as like quite mushy and woolly. We'll like hold hands. Actually, no.
You're at the Green Gathering, babe.
Well, let's hold hands. I'm really into it. Hold hands with anybody here. But what I will say is, I think if you can hold, what you said about language, and if you can hold the relationship, that opens the door for disagreement. Disagreement is super, super important, but you shut down disagreement when you bring anger, when you bring contempt, and when you bring kind of hateful language.
Thank you. Rosie, you've got some hands up, haven't you? Where do you want to go?
So, firstly, for context, I'm a Green Party member, and we obviously just had our still having our internal election stuff. Listening to the discussion around like left parties on the left not kind of constantly at each other's throats and attacking each other, I'm wondering like how does that mix with like kind of constructive criticism and having conversations that sometimes need to be had, I think. So for example, one of the independent MPs who recently got elected, partially what's happened in Palestine, but I'm sure loads of other stuff as well, Imran Hussein commented on Motin Ali's deputy campaign, I suppose, to become deputy leader, and the criticism he was coming under for this kind of dodging issues on sort of trans rights. And what he said was that what we need to accept is that a majority, and he's due to join this kind of new Your Party, whatever it's called. He said that majority of Muslims are socially conservative, and we need to kind of accept that. And like, I don't want to. Firstly, I think that's very Islamophobic. I don't think we should make statements about like pretend that everyone has like one opinion or one set of opinions. So I think that was wrong. But how do we avoid pushing people to reform or pushing people away while having those conversations?
So that's a really, really important point. So how do we have constructive criticism, but maybe have less fighting on the left? I mean, ancient problem, right? It's a really, really important problem. Is there anyone that wants to come back on that particular issue on fighting on the left and how we have constructive criticism? If you've got a point on that, then please put your hand up just now. Anything, very quick comment from the... Thank you, John.
I think it's a really, really good question. And one of the things that I feel very strongly is that we are going to have to make common cause with people who have got socially conservative views, right? I mean, I think there's no real good data on what the percentages of people who actually kind of are proper radical lefties. But I mean, there's good evidence that it's around 25% maybe, but we're never enough to form any kind of government, and we're also, of course, systematically excluded in all sorts of ways. So we're going to have to make common cause with people who don't agree with us on everything. That's just going to have to happen. And for me, it will always come back to bread and butter will come first. And that can sound like, let's park.
When you say bread and butter, you material issues,
wages, rental rights, these basic stuff. A reduction of social wealth and income disparities, right?
Thank you.
The basic stuff that is, for me, the building block of other equalities that come later. And actually, since most groups that are kind of, I can't think of the right word, for want of a better word, within the identity politics spectrum, marginalised, most of them are also marginalised economically, right? So, by doing those bread and butter things, we're also lifting them more disproportionately compared to other groups, right? So I think we have to reach out beyond our base.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really valuable point. Is it on that particular issue? The anger one. Okay, I'm going to come back to that, actually. I'm going to go to you first, and then we'll come back to anger, because that's a big one. I want to open it up again.
Mine's partly on anger as well.
Great, let's do anger, babe.
So I'm radical feminist. My politics is rooted in green philosophical basis, and I found myself living in South Buckinghamshire in a Tory stronghold. It's been Tory for 150 years. Elected as a local councillor, and dealing with the anger that comes up within you when you're confronted with people who you think are radically opposed to you. And I think over the journey of kind of being in this for a decade now in that local area, I've found that my work was in subverting my own anger, or really looking to understand what was the cause of my anger. Brilliant. And then using that as a way of connecting with other people who were also angry, even though they felt like they were ostensibly at the opposite end of the spectrum. Because I think, our green philosophical basis tells us that we have that phrase, more in common than that which divides us. I know it's much used, but I think there's truth in it. And so when we can reach across and find those aspects of unity, because we get beyond the contempt, and I did start from a place of contempt, and it was blimmin' hard work, and I was miserable all the time. And now I think I've stayed in being rooted in my integrity, but still being prepared to kind of find the common ground. And that has, that's made difference. It's made difference in my community. And that's ultimately what we're all trying to do, right? Affect change.
That's really cool. Well
offering.
Done. Yeah, really cool. So I don't know about other people, but I am trying to train myself. I'm really fabulously bad at this, by the way. As soon as politics are involved, I go off like a rocket. But I'm trying to train myself to hear that noise, which is sort of what you're talking about. There's a kind of noise in your head where you realise that the other person is lost and your curiosity is gone, and you've just rushed to anger. So I really salute you. I think it's really impressive. Okay, there was another anger kind of related point. Yeah, please, if we could get
Could I just make a really quick point for any of the other county councillors and town councillors in the room? We've got a signal group for us, and we support each other on there, and it's really useful. There's a couple of radical councillors in here, But it's really like you can't necessarily get support from your friends or your community when you're in it, but other councillors might understand what you're going through. So I'm very happy to exchange details with you afterwards if you want to be in a support group for
let's do that. That's nice. Okay, thank you.
Isn't the antidote to anger solidarity? I mean, there have been these inflection moments, like when the migrant centres were being attacked, when the NHS was in trouble and people volunteered, where lots of British people came forward because they were moved at the situation, and it felt like a bonding moment. And I remember with the NHS when I thought maybe this is how we get out of the bad feelings about Brexit, but unfortunately what we got as a result of that was Eat Out to Help Out, an economic thing, not a human thing. But shouldn't we be expressing solidarity with those people who are angry justifiably?
Yeah, so I think this comes back a little bit to John's point, where we go to, economic inequality. The rich have run off with everything, and that might be a good place to start. Rosie, you have someone else, but I just want to check if the panel want to come back. Did you want to come back, Tyrone? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I mean, it's kind of what I was saying in the previous answer anyway, but I think that's absolutely the right approach, It's back to, there's two choices in which we can approach, people who choose to, obviously loads, but to people who choose to vote for reform, might be inclined to vote for reform, and it's one is approach them with content, which is, why are you doing that? I can't believe you're doing that. You must be a racist. Or solidarity, which is, I understand that, you're sick of being on poverty wages and you're sick of our crumbling public services. I understand where you're coming from. And then maybe we can work from there and actually have a conversation and which one's most likely to work. And even if it's think about the things that you care about, if someone had opposing views, if they came to you and said, I shut you down, then you're not gonna really agree with that. And I think similarly with the question that was asked over here around sort of people on the left as well, and sometimes in how we need to be holding ourselves accountable on the left. We all need to make ourselves better on the left all the time. That's absolutely right. But again, when somebody may have an opposing view or may see something from a different viewpoint, I think again in the past, and I can think of examples within my own party and outside of my wider movement work, in which then that's just met with content rather than why do you have that view? Where does it come from? How can we navigate through this? And when someone's treated with content in a way, then they might as well go. I'll just go off to reform then. And maybe that's not a simple way, but it's almost like, if you're going to treat me like a dickhead, I'm going to be a dickhead then, So it's a bad analogy, but yeah. So let's just.
Actually, I'm going to keep this moving, John. Sorry, would you just do your point?
I just want to say very quickly. I mean, I don't actually agree that we shouldn't be using combative language. I want to fight fascism. I don't want it to go away nicely. I want to fight it, and I know that people in the past have fought the BNP off the streets, and sometimes you do have to fight. And I do agree. Right. I agree that we need to talk.
This is what
I agree that we need to understand the different audiences and not group everyone into it, but I absolutely do believe that we need to all be confronting fascism at the moment because it is a real threat. And it might not be as much of a threat as it is to me, as to an asylum seeker or to a trans person or something.
Okay, that's really useful. So we've got a few hands up, and I'm doing a bad job of. So Rosa, before that, I'm just going to go to this young woman on the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I really agree with that, and I think we're almost having two conversations about anger. One is interpersonal and one is anger at the system, how we channel that and how we actually use that to be a productive force. And if you combine it with love and compassion for people, that anger is needed, and it's what keeps our politics radical. I wanted to ask more of a practical question, really.
Go for it.
In that radical social change doesn't just happen in the electoral system. And all of the people here, what can we be doing in our communities to get organised and fight the fascism that's oncoming, but also keep these communities safe if the worst thing does happen, so we can be organised and mobilised to fight the fascists on the streets when they come outside these migrant hotels as they're coming year on year. It seems like it's a pattern now. And maybe do we have those organisations already, or do new ones need to be created? So it's a question.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting point. Yes, please, thanks. And then we'll go over here.
Or visually recorded, please. There are loads of organisations that are Antifa in the UK. So if you live in Bristol, Bournemouth, Plymouth, East Anglia, Liverpool, Manchester, you can Google them. They all have Instagram accounts. What they do... what they do is they go and they stand in front of these hotels and they protect people every single summer, because this isn't one summer of pogroms. This is every single summer increasing violence, emboldened fascists on our streets since 2016, and it's fucking scary. And this sort of like liberal conversation about not using contempt or fuck fascism or fight fascism is a load of shit, really, because the migrants that are the sharp end of this violence are fucking terrified. And what you need to do is you need to Google these Antifa groups and you need to fucking join them.
So I just want to come back on that point before we go to other people. So I agree with you. I found myself at an Antifa demo. I would really like to come back on your point. So I found myself at an Antifa demo in an area which I don't live in. And I suddenly realised that I was saying zero tolerance to fascism on our streets in an area that I didn't live in. And there were young people around the edge, and it looked like they were fascists. Like, from where we were standing, it looked like they were fascists. Now, I got an opportunity to talk to these young people, and actually, they live in a really boring place, and there was stuff going on, and they were just there for the crack, basically. So I think we do need to be quite careful about the way that we do this. That's what I'm saying. So I will come back to you if we've got time, but I just want to go to this person over here who's been waiting quite a long time. Thanks.
Hiya, can I ask not to be filmed, please? Thank you.
Go for it, thanks.
I'm a social worker in Lancashire, and we're a reform council, unfortunately. And I can see why people have voted for them, like you've been sharing. And we work, obviously, with a lot of marginalised people who are experiencing poverty. I feel as a social worker, I'm in a really privileged position to do that relational work that you're talking about and really have those conversations with people when they're actually, the issues are arising for them. But in another way, our hands are tied because we have to be apolitical. It's difficult to have those conversations when you're also trying to fill in 1,000,000 forms for that person. So I kind of wondered if there's anyone in the room or on the panel who has a thought about how, when we can't do that direct activism with people, what resources can we use, and how do we do that work of kind of showing the policies to people who don't have the energy or, frankly, the education to engage with them directly?
That's a really great question. So there might be thoughts in the audience about that. Did you want to come back on that question in particular? That would be great, thank you. And then we'll go to the panel. So just here, Rosa, thanks.
Thank you. Well, I find the best way of talking to reform voters, and I have experience because my father's in his 80s and he's very much of that point of view, you start talking about the NHS, because they all really, really need and want and believe in the NHS. So I start saying, oh, do you realise that if Reform get in, they're going to dismantle the NHS and they're going to replace it with an American-style health system? And I think that does have impact. It does start, because we saw, obviously, during COVID, how much people valued and supported and needed the NHS. So that's my way in. And I know we've got the elections coming up. We're in a crisis situation. Obviously, the electoral system needs to be reformed, but we're in an emergency situation, and we need to really make sure people don't vote for these parties.
Okay. Yeah. So is there anyone on the panel who wants to come back on that?
I just wanted to come back on the anger point that was coming from the lady over here who has maybe gone. I can't. Oh no, she's there, but no, she's just going. Anyway. It's really about the talk about not using contempt, not using direct anger. Is for me. You can't. Well, no, you can do what you like. I said I'm angry. I have common ground with these people, right? My point is not don't get angry about fascism. My point is don't drive people into the arms of reform by using contempt and anger at them or disallowing their anger, right? Against the actual elected rep, the problem we've got is we've got a potentially radical voter group there who could vote for the 600,000 party or whatever, Corbyn and Sultana, could even vote for the Green Party, who knows, but are going to vote for fucking reform. Okay, and at the moment, they're heading for government, right? They got 30% in the last poll. The next two highest parties got 15. I mean, they are heading for government, right? So we have to do something about that.
Okay, let's let them come back. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to your point. So these organisations are incredibly organised. So there's a group called Red Flare, which is an anti-fascist intel group that have spotter cards. So you go out on a demo and you see somebody, obviously, that looks underage or isn't on the spotter card or isn't an organised fascist. You're not going to approach them. You're not going to try and confront them. Like, these groups aren't just people running around outside hotels trying to defend them. system. There are incredibly organised national networks that people can join to defend their communities and defend migrants.
Oh, that's understood. That's great. So do you want to say how people find out about that? Is there a website or...?
Yeah, so Red Flare is an anti-fascist intel group you can just Google. They also have an Instagram. And then all of these anti-fascist organised groups have Instagram pages and will have websites. Okay. So you can just Google them and join them.
Thank you very much.
Bex, can I say something about that?
Yes, go for it.
So I think anti-fag is absolutely necessary. I used to live in Germany. I was living with an anti-fag group. These it's both and. It's not either or. All I'm trying to say is this is an upstream and downstream problem. When people are coming and standing in front of hotels, yes, you put your body on the line. Yes, you do that. But why are people going there in the first place? Well, because they feel pissed off and that a lot of left parties, let's be honest, treat them with contempt. So what I'm saying is this is an upstream problem. We need to think about like engaging on that level as well as the other stuff. It's not about either or. But like I do feel that sometimes from that side of things, and I've been involved in both groups, as I'm saying, like there's a way that this feels like woolly or not important, but actually these are the day-to-day relationships. These are our family. These are our friends and neighbours, right? If we lose that connection with them, do you know who is talking to them? Reform, right? You know what Reform are not doing? Saying, screw you guys, I don't care. They're doing the door knocking, right? And I'm sure you know this. I know this because I've had people knocking on my door, and they're pretty well organised at having good, persuasive conversations. All I'm saying is, if that is working for them, why shouldn't it work for us?
That's really great, thank you. I'll come back to you, John. Can you just say your point about what Reform is? Because not everyone knows this. So it's easy to assume that Reform is a conventional political party. Could you just explain to people what it is?
I'm not sure what you're asking for,
well,
sorry.
I think you've made the point that it's actually a private company.
Oh,
is
yeah.
that right?
Well, I think possibly most people here might know this. I mean, it's not it's a private... It's a PLC, you know. It's owned by Nigel Farage. Yeah, I mean, it's basically.
It's just a really important thing to drop into conversations, I would imagine. All right, so people do want to hear about this.
I think it's a party now, though.
Yeah, I think it started.
Yeah, I think they're now a party. Are they not?
Yeah, go on.
Well, I think they are. I'm just.
Are they
I
actually
think they
now?
were.
Yeah,
I think they were forming
right,
a political party precisely.
Sorry,
there you go. They've heard and they've corrected the problem.
I really want to come back on what you were saying about talking to Reform voters and the NHS, and what you were saying in the back about how the person who's a social worker. So. Like this is what I mean about hyperlocality and issues and listening. Like what matters to one person in one area isn't the same as what matters to another group of people in another area. And Reform are doing an incredibly effective listening exercises in Wales. That they're in my area that they're campaigning against wind farms. Around here they're campaigning against sewage in the River Wye, and I'm sure in Cardiff it's something else. They're really effective at that kind of hyper-local messaging. One thing that I think is interesting is the tax extreme wealth is something that resonates with a lot of the different demographics of Reform voters. That's also a thing to push them on. But I think really what going forward, ahead of these 2026 elections and the 2029 elections, really listening to what people are saying and then directing them to other organisations or community groups who might be doing something in their local area. That's kind of a hyperlocality visibility piece that I was talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really important. Yeah, big round of applause. You're trying to do it on the ground. Tyrone, and then there's a question in you.
Okay, I'll be quick because we've run out of time.
Thank you.
Well, wait till I finish first. No, I think there's one thing that we're really good at doing on the left or on this side, which is having these conversations. I have been to countless conversations over the last few months, 6 months, framed in some kind of way around how we're going to stop this surge to the right, etc., and have some really good debates and conversations around it. Maybe what we're not so good at doing on our side is taking these conversations outside of our bubbles and outside of echo chambers, which, I know is often said, but I think that's really that next level again. So, like we said, we've been mentioned in this talk, Reformer all over community spaces, all over football grounds, all over, just everywhere, in a sense of, it can be a bit intimidating for us to go into these spaces and to try and organise and to try and change hearts and minds. And for me, it's not even about directing people to a particular party or this or that. It's just having these conversations around whether it's reframing the villain, as I was getting from before, or just relating to folks as to why they feel like that. And, and when you actually open those conversations, you can lead to finding those common grounds, etc., from there. And when I think of those real practical examples where people within our movement space or on the left are actually doing that, I don't know of that many of them. I know of many ways in which we're sort of combating it for our activism work and for our protesting and going to our conferences and having these conversations and debates, but I do not know enough examples of us going into communities, and that's what has to change.
Yeah, so if the only time we're going in is when we're protesting, that's perhaps a little bit one-sided. We had a question at the back. Thanks for your patience.
Oh, no problem at all. Oh, is that all right?
Yeah, we can hear you. That's
okay,
fine.
good. So I'm trans, and the people that we're talking about being nice to and not alienating and all that sort of thing, they've got billionaire donors. They're all over the news. They want to erase people like me from public life. So if we're going to do this, if we're going to listen to people who think I should not have access to public toilets or any space, basically, how do we make sure we're not just like silencing trans people, silencing marginalized people, telling people like me to shut up and just like giving more power to the people who are already in power? Or is it just like this is not a space for people who are marginalized and don't want to be marginalized?
No, thank you for your question. It's a really important question, and I would suggest that it runs across all of the marginalised folk. How do we make sure that we're not just silencing that issue, but we're foregrounding it and including people? People on the panel who want to come back on that.
Well, I want to be really clear that my interest is always in the voters. It's not in the party. You're absolutely right. I don't want to engage necessarily with the people who are kind of running reform. I'm really interested in those millions of people out there who potentially... That's millions of people we could be talking to. And that's just fundamentally my point. I think we get too sucked into this question of like, reform are an elitist party, but actually a lot of us also think in elites, like whether that's like a kind of political elite or a social elite, we're thinking about how elites relate to one another. I was fascinated after Trump got re-elected that everyone was talking about like now what Trump was going to do in power. Now obviously that's really important, but there was millions and millions of people across the States who just voted for Trump. And actually the most interesting work that's happened in the States over the last few months, in my opinion, is been people going out talking to people. A multiracial, working class and middle class coalition of people voted for this person. That's where all our energy should be directed, not other people who are using that for their own bad purposes. And that's my answer to the marginalisation question. It's because a lot of those people themselves, as John said, are themselves marginalised. Why has this happened? And I think building those alliances is the best place that we could be putting all our energy.
Thank you. So we have 2 more questions in the audience. Kim, your point, and then we'll go into the audience.
I want to say thank you very much for that question. I think what's really important, one of the things that I'd like to do ahead of the 2026 Welsh Assembly elections, but we don't have an organisation, that's the problem, is pressing the individual candidates to make pledges around supporting trans rights, supporting climate action, supporting LGBTIQ rights, supporting women's rights, because that's what I'm concerned about, is that erosion. So if we can get progressive candidates pledging those things, and I think that will help to protect and defend more marginalised groups' rights.
Okay, thank you. So we have a lady at the back who's been really patient, and then a gentleman, and then we'll run out of time. Okay, go for it.
Thank you. Tyrone, you mentioned accountability and us holding accountability, but I was thinking, I don't think there's enough accountability in government, and I don't know if there's a way that we could change the way the system works so that there is accountability as a backup for if reform do get more seats. What will happen when the councils are too young to actually manage a budget, or when they start messing things up? There should be some safety net. We've seen with Keir Starmer how he's literally turned back on most of the things he said before election, and it's just going to keep happening if parties can pledge things that they have no intention of following through just to get votes.
Completely critical question.
Appreciate panel thoughts.
Yeah, across the political spectrum, accountability seems to be disappearing. Panel.
Yeah, it's a really tough question in some sense, but yeah, absolutely. So many governments, successive governments, aren't held accountable, and it's really difficult to know the reasons why sometimes. Like, so even with the Labour government right now and Keir Starmer, you can make X pledges, completely goes back on the vast majority of them, but then you kind of are reliant a bit on that party's backbone to do something about it too. It's like none of the MPs, etc., are speaking out. Obviously a lot of the membership have left and stuff, but the party itself has kind of got to hold itself accountable when your elected leader has gone back against all its sort of pledges and stuff. And I guess I'm no Labourite, so it's easy for me to say, but like that's the kind of stuff that's a fundamental red line for me, is when it makes you lose your integrity as such, because it's partly the party's job to be able to hold themselves accountable, because they're going to be accountable to their members and their voters and stuff. So I think that shows part of how the political system is broken, and in particular the two-party system, who don't really have that accountability. They don't have a democratic sort of voting system, one member, one vote, or anything like that. So it is quite difficult to hold them elected officials to account, because essentially we're meant to be holding them account every 4 years in an election, but that's clearly not enough. So I think it's a fault of both the two main parties to allow themselves to be held unaccountable. And then what other ways do we as voters hold them accountable is yeah, so it could go into the whole wider thing. But yeah, I agree, it's a big problem.
So I think it's really worth trying to keep track of things like scrutiny committees and select committees. They are a very blunt tool for the problem that you're identifying. The problem is very large, but they do interrogate policy, but they don't get that much publicity afterwards. And maybe we should do some of that. We should talk about what's going on. We should follow some of these things and foreground the conclusions and recommendations. Okay, I'm going to be really sneaky and try and do 2 more quick questions. So I've got one at the back here, gentleman doing a valiant job with his young child, and then Toby.
Thanks for that. Thanks to all the panelists for coming and talking to everyone. So I'm from the States originally, and grew up quite poor, evangelical family. So and time again, they vote Republican against their own best interest. Right. And I think it's a tribal thing, a cultural thing. And I'm seeing very similar things here in the UK. So how do you square that? Even if you're trying to sell a popular agenda and it connects with people, trying to make cost of living more affordable, trying to increase access to healthcare, it doesn't connect with people. They're after the culture war issues. They're after owning the libs. So how is the message of trying to make people's lives better going to square with also their tribe, their camp? Because you got working class people who have friends who are going to vote reform regardless of what the other side, just because Andrew Tate told them to do so.
That's a critical issue. Yeah. Anything on the panel, or there might even be people in the audience, people voting against their interests?
Well, this is why I always go to bread and butter. I talk about housing, rent, wages. These are the things, health service. These are the things that if we fight on that terrain, we win. If we get onto culture wars, who knows? We probably won't, is my opinion. But yeah, and I know what you're saying is that it doesn't win. You think that the culture is able to be stirred up to overtake so material reality, if you like. But I agree, and it's a very difficult issue. I mean, the trans person here raised this question, like, how do we not abandon that part of society, that marginalised group, but how do we also go after socially conservative or people who are susceptible to culture war manipulation, right? It's a really, really difficult problem. But I would say concentrate on the bread and butter. Put that first.
Anything else on the panel for that issue? Francis?
Yeah,
really quick point.
I do think that this is a question also about like people's feelings of status in the system. It's not just these are not just simple economic. I agree with John to some degree, but I think only when you bring in a class analysis, which brings in sociology. So a lot of my thought about this is like people have the sense of things being done to them. This owning the libs is a pushback in the other direction from the sense that they have been done to for a long time. I think we can empathise with that. I think a lot of people have been done to for a long time, and I think that question of then how we respond to that is with quite a bit of empathy and with our own solutions, right? But starting from that place, understanding that people are deeply affected by questions of power and hierarchy. Don't let people tell you that they're just voting on material class interest. That is also about power and hierarchy, right? And I think if we focus on those things, including in our own conversations, which is why I bring it to the micro level, if we're having conversations that feel hierarchical to people, they're not going to vote with the way that we are voting. If they feel more egalitarian, they actually can feel that we are with them and we can bring policy which help make that good, right?
Okay, so... Thank you. So we are out of time, pretty much. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Toby for a quick comment rather than a question, I think. And then this gentleman next to you has had his hand up a few times, and I think maybe you wanted to make a comment. So can we just hear from you two? I'm sorry. We're
is this okay? So
super quick.
The standing outside the hotels and resisting fascism, the political parties not going deeper into their tribalism, 2 key themes that I'm taking from this. But these conversations that we need to have in our communities, that is the really, in terms of most of us here, I feel like that's the biggest one. And what my question was going to be, how are we learning how to do those conversations? Yeah. What do we know about getting those conversations right? Yeah. Do you have resources, information, learning? That maybe that's another. Yeah. Maybe that's a follow-up.
Yeah, so that's a really critical question. We had a session in the tent actually yesterday morning, which I think we recorded. So that will be up on, and this is a good opportunity for me to plug the YouTube channel for this tent. Nice. So if there are people that you want to see the stuff and they're not at the festival, you can look on the YouTube channel and send them the talks. And there was a talk on how to have better conversations and some skills building there. Did you want to make a quick point? Yeah, before we finish up. Thank you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed listening to the conversation. I've really enjoyed listening to the broad range of views that have been shared. And actually, I feel like we are all talking with really common cause. And I think to go back to like you mentioned Memdani in New York, like what he did against a democratic establishment that still refuses to endorse him in a race that should be a slam dunk for the Democratic Party, I think just speaks to how corrosive the power of community is to all of that kind of establishment politics, and how corrosive the power of community is to anything that is extremist and actually fundamentally, however you might label it, really against the will of the people. So I think the will of the people is a phrase that's massively been stolen from us. Like, I think that is the jewel that has been stolen from us by the far right, and it's being used to peddle something that's so sinister. And I think actually the soft art, the gentle art, but the strong art of these conversations that we have with our friends, with our family, with the people that we work with, the people in our communities, stops people going to hotels to smash them up.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is where that's where I think we all have common cause.
If we can slow that down, that would be amazing. Okay, that's a really good point to end on. Thank you so much for your participation, and thanks to the panel. Big round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Rebecca.